One of my friends wrote me and said, I stumbled upon you and your church through a friend. I actually attend her church. I've been attending there since last year after I left my church of 7 years. I am a psychology and theology grad from Regent University, so I am well versed in worldviews, etc. I've been studying and praying about the organic church for some time. I have read the books by Frank Viola, Pagan Christianity, etc., getting ready to read the red letters and really feel the church needing to shift. I noticed that your church has done studies on these and seems to be leaning toward a more organic way of church. So I was wondering, as a fellow brother and ageer, if you would share your heart on the matter. I do not feel called out of the institutional church. I actually believe God is going to use me in it, but so many pastors and churchgoers see this as a bad shift. What direction is your congregation moving in, and how you feel about it? Now, this is a great question, and the cat's out of the bag. If you didn't know, I am an Assembly of God pastor. I have my credentials through them, and we do function as more of a non-denominational church, but I was raised in the assemblies, and I think it's a good thing to be a part of. But this is a great question because, true, if you do follow Radiant Fellowship at all, the church that I pastor, we do really hard at keeping the growth organic. Now, the verse that I always stand on, plain and simple as a pastor, is the one found in Matthew 16:18, and it says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, okay, and on this rock I will build my church." Now, there's probably a lot of discussion and theologies behind this verse, but I put all my trust and my bank on the one part where it says, "I will build my church." One of the first things any pastor should do when they get hired at a church is resign. Okay, now what I mean is literally just say, "God, whatever you want to do, let's do it. Let me be the voice. Let me be a hearing so that I'm able to be a good steward of what you're doing. But what do you want to do here?" I had a conversation a couple years ago with a pastor next in town here that he was literally saying, my church, it's a lot of retired people, and I want to go contemporary. I want to be like your church. How do I do that? He even went on to say that we're starting to do some Matt Redman songs. And I was thinking, okay, the song portion is just a small section of being a contemporary church. It's a whole DNA, it's a whole lifestyle. And I remember when we first got Radiant Fellowship going, I was standing before a panel and they were asking me for my mission statement. I told them, I think this is where we're going. I ultimately wrote about it, mission statements, in my new book. There's a whole chapter called The Myth of the Mission Statement. But nonetheless, afterwards they said, "So are you an emerging church?" I didn't even know what that meant. I do now a little bit. I understand that, but just a church. That's really the whole heart and soul of it. I've never been a micromanager, and therefore I don't see the need for planning way out in the future, because really the mission of the church is what? To love people and minister to them. And so I don't see, 5-year plan. We're going to have 300 people. And, a lot of times what happens is when you do those 5-year, 10-year, 15 plans based on numbers, it's driven by a building program, and I'm not about building programs. If I'm all about maintaining the one we have and maybe adding services and things like that, but I guess I would rather take building program funds and help people avoid foreclosure and help people out in bills and just serve people. That would really be an interesting thing. It would be a dream come true if I ever did this at our church, or saw a church where they did a capital campaign and then used it to do a jubilee within their church to help pay off everybody's debt. Wouldn't that be cool? You see, when you're an organic church, it scares you at times because it is so hands-off. You really need to be a macro manager. You need to sit back and be okay with not having a missions program for a while. You have to sit back and say, let's see what's going to happen here. You have to sit back and say, okay, let's ditch the message series. Let's ditch, the crafty stuff, and just observe for 6 months or a year what's going on here. We did that with our missions program, and ultimately out of that, from within the church came people and missions that were coming near and dear to people's hearts. And so we just said, this makes sense. Let's support them. Rather than every missionary that came in, we felt obligated to support him, even if they didn't line up with what we were doing or theologically or whatever. And so and what this is it's organic growth that begins happening, and it's by staying in tune to what the Lord's doing within this community. So I think it's a lot healthier, because all of a sudden, instead of bringing in somebody, instead of force feeding something and saying, this is what we're going to do, you sit back for a little while. And, in those times when you're sitting back and watching, you are going to squirm a little bit. People will become just a little disgruntled. I'm reminded of the title of Mike Yaconelli's book, Messy Spirituality. This is going to happen. However, what's going to be even cooler is that after you've observed, you're going to see people coming up and saying, hey, I think this is going to be a good thing. Or, boy, this mission is really near and dear to so many of us within the church. What do you think about supporting it? Or on and on it goes. The really cool thing is that you actually begin doing and hiring staff from within the church, because it is so unique as an organic church that the people within the church get it. So now all of a sudden you get somebody that says, oh man, I just love the teenagers in this group. I could see myself directing it. Awesome. Sadly, what happens though is that the church looks for a credential when it comes to staff, and it's really sometimes can be quite the nightmare. I've hired multiple youth pastors that had the credential, and it's like, I think my favorite thing is just sitting back and watching people grow out of it. So, and I think what happens is when you're an organic church and you just see things grow, it moves a little slower. However, this is key. You see spiritual goals, okay? Spiritual goals is what really matters in a church. And when you do organic things, the spiritual goals grow and they're met versus physical goals. Now, let me just expound on this just a little bit here. Physical goals is when a church goes from building project to remodel, and in each $2 million met, sometimes if it's a new building, $15 million met, there's huge celebration, there's pomp and circumstance, there's all these things. And then inevitably, very quickly afterwards, they go into a slump. People start withdrawing. Statistically, many pastors will quit and resign because there's this blah feeling going on. And so what they do is they set up the next one. Okay, now we're going to remodel the youth room. Okay, that goal's met. Now we're going to remodel the lobby, the foyer, the narthex, if you're really churchy. And so what's happening is they're bouncing around from physical goal to physical goal, thinking that's ministry somehow, instead of saying, let's set up ministry goals. Okay, let's do these things. And I tell you what, ministry goals, spiritual goals, they sustain you. They sustain a church, and they keep it going. Hey, I got a little lengthy on this one, a little preachy, but you kind of know where my heart is when I do that. So send me your thoughts, vtwinrev@thatsnotmygod.com, or you can post it right here on YouTube or find me on Facebook. I would love to hear from you. Talk to you soon.